Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Hi, thank you. Thank you all for being here. My name is Marcia Eli. On behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, and the Center for Brooklyn History, it is my privilege to welcome you to tonight's program. The question of ensuring that our children have access to the benefits of the internet, but are also protected from the addictive algorithms and inappropriate content that do such great damage to their health, mental and otherwise, is one that keeps millions of parents and increasingly hundreds of city, state, and federal officials up at night. This is an urgent issue for our changing world, and a timely one, as many of you may know. Just this morning, the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee held a full committee hearing on the matter with testimony from the CEOs of the biggest and most powerful social media companies, including Meta, Discord, Snap, TikTok, and X. Tonight, we are honored to be joined by three leaders, each working in their respective spheres to bring sanity to this Wild West. In a minute, I have the honor of bringing them up here to the stage, but I really would be remiss if I did not note that the issue of protecting minors and their use of the internet is deeply important to the Brooklyn Public Library. Since the early 2000s, BPL has complied with the Children's Internet Protection Act, CIPA, meaning that all patron computers at BPL branches filter inappropriate content, ensuring that minors who are surfing the internet in our spaces do so safely. So as we grapple as a society with this troubling issue, it's uplifting to learn about the work that's being done. And on that note, it gives me great honor to invite to the stage our panel and moderator. I'm not going to go at length about who they are because you know them. Please help me welcome New York State Senator Andrew Gennardis, the 67th Attorney General for the State of New York, Letitia James, digital well-being pioneer and the founder of #HalfTheStory, Larissa May. And our distinguished moderator, New York Times opinion columnist, Michelle Goldberg. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all so much for being here. Up to you now.
Well, I'm thrilled to be, is this working? Okay, I'm thrilled to be having this discussion with you today. This couldn't be more timely. It was a strange feeling to find myself almost agreeing with Lindsey Graham today as he screamed at Mark Zuckerberg that he has blood on his hands. But before we talk about the specifics of the legislation that you're fighting for, I want to just try to frame the problem. And so maybe we can start with you, Larissa, because one of the things that Zuckerberg said today, which I think was just not true, was that there is no proven causal link between their algorithms and teenage social media use and declining mental health. And yeah, how do you see it, and what is it that brought you into this work?
Well, the first thing I would say is that Mark Zuckerberg clearly didn't read his own Facebook files. But the next thing I would say is that when I'm at the Capitol, oftentimes lobbying, all you have to do is look at user growth from 0 to 1 billion users on Meta, and you look at the rates of anxiety, mental health, depression, suicide, self-poisoning, and they correlate almost directly. The average American teenager will spend 30 years of their life behind a device, and we know that they're the loneliest, they are the sickest, and they are really looking for someone to save them. And that's why we have you, because New York just said that social media is an environmental toxin, but it's also a social toxin. And if we don't do something now, humanity will continue to evolve at a place where kids will be lost. And I heard last week that if we don't change this, we will lose 1 in 4 kids from the next generation because of the social media and mental health crisis.
Well, what do you mean by 1 in 4 kids? Like 1 in 4?
So literally 25% of them. That actually came from the Boston Children's Hospital Media and Wellbeing Lab from their chief psychiatrist there. And when you frame it that way, I mean, 1 in 4 Americans lives with a mental illness. And from what she's seeing in the next generation, that is the reality.
Okay, so they talked a lot today about the the federal legislation that has been introduced in the Senate that seems to be going nowhere. How is that different than the legislation that you have introduced in New York?
So there's been a bunch of federal bills. The main one that I think a lot of focus has been on is on KOSA, the Keep Online Safety Act, Kids Online Safety Act. And really that has a lot of protections around reforming or regulating some of the features of social media, but also has this subjective standard of harm to kids, which has caused a lot of questions. It's a very loosely defined term. It could be viewed differently by different people based on their ideologies. How do you define what's harmful to kids, what's not harmful to kids? Is it certain type of content? Is it not certain types of content? What we've tried to do in New York, working in partnership with the Attorney General, has been to say we really can't grapple with the content piece for a couple, even if we don't like some of the content, for a bunch of reasons. Number one, it's hard to pin down. Number two, you run into the First Amendment buzzsaw right away. So let's think about the features of these social media apps and how people are being shown this content. And the biggest culprit here is the algorithm. The algorithm, which is designed to curate content for users to show them things that they don't necessarily sign up to see. And we've all suffered as a result of this. You go to look up one picture or one video, and then next thing you know, 5 hours later, you're down a rabbit hole deeper than Alice was, right? Like it never ends. And you might be taken from seeing something that's very innocent or very relevant to what you're looking for, and it's like just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit. And then 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, 3 hours later, you're seeing very different content that has really negative effects. So we are trying to focus on the algorithm, that being the most identifiable feature of social media. It's causing the greatest harm. And we think that should be turned off for kids as a default option, so that it empowers both parents and kids to have the type of experience that they want on social media, not what the experience the apps want them to have.
So I actually want to go back to this question of the algorithm in a minute, but first I wanted to ask you, I mean, something that Lindsey Graham said today was, while he was berating Mark Zuckerberg and these other tech leaders, he said something along the lines of, I wish we could sue you, or I wish you could be sued, but you can't. And he was referring to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which immunizes platforms from the sorts of, libel and defamation laws that say like the New York Times or MSNBC or kind of any media company is subject to. And so I saw that, but I also thought, well, some people are suing him, you're suing him. So can you tell me about where your lawsuit stands and the ways that the Communications Decency Act might be a roadblock?
So Michelle, I'm suing a lot of people. First, let's talk about the business model of social media. The business model of social media is basically to optimize the number of clicks. 2, to focus on and target children. 3, to unfortunately hook, ensnare children as a result of these addictive algorithms. And then lastly, pretend you know nothing about it. Recognizing that in fact there's been documents which demonstrate, in fact, you are aware of it. And so Section 230 immunizes them, just like there's a law which immunizes gun manufacturers. And so we need to repeal that law so that we could have, we being the attorney generals all across the state, because there's a patchwork of laws in each and every state. And most of these laws that have been introduced, because we recognize the federal government has failed us, it's up to the states. Most of them have been enjoined right now based on the First Amendment. And so it's important, again, that we have this federal law, but in the absence of any action by the federal government, because they've been hijacked by special interests, corporate interests, it's up to state attorney generals, and we are stepping in, and it's a bipartisan approach. And that's why I, along with 42 other attorney generals, have filed a lawsuit against Meta and Instagram and Facebook, again, for the harm that they do to children.
So can you expand on that harm? This is actually a question for all of you, because it goes beyond just the kind of addictive nature of the algorithm, right? It's also about I don't know, I've seen it described as like a treadmill or an escalator. It's about the kind of content that the algorithm serves people.
So can I just say that since 2012, with the proliferation of these addictive algorithms, we have seen, and the Surgeon General has documented, that in fact there's been a correlation between mental health amongst children, admissions of children into hospitals, depression amongst children, suicidal ideation, self-harm, all of that. And I've seen that for myself. And the only reason why I got into this space is because during COVID, there was a young girl that I know who unfortunately could not get admitted into a hospital, and she talked to me a lot about social media, and I couldn't find a pediatric bed for her. And it was only her parent could not find a bed for her, and it was only until the Attorney General got involved, and that should not be the case. And we're seeing more and more young people, unfortunately, suffer from these harms, suffer from the lack of their self-image has been suffered as a result of these filters. And we need to do something about it. We can't stand idly by and do absolutely nothing in the face of all of these children who are struggling and suffering with depression.
Yeah, and to put it into context a little deeper, within the Surgeon General's report, he reported that 90% of young people ages to 13 to 18 are on social media, a third of them almost constantly. The digital platforms do not have speed bumps, which is what you are really creating with the bill. And what we need to create for these kids, they are basically living in a neurobiological storm where they are at the most critical point of development, and these platforms are preying on that limbic system in the reward center and hooking their brain into a dopamine loop that they can't escape from. I'm up here as a survivor of someone who almost took my life 9 years ago to social media, which is why I started this organization to give youth power. And while we see kids that come with us to the Capitol and get on stages like this, there's a large majority who actually don't have caregivers, don't have parents, and don't have systems in place to support their emotional well-being. And it is critical at this point for tech and for the bills that you are passing and for states to do something about it, because we are literally losing kids on the vine to this. I mean, there are on TikTok challenges, choking challenges that kids are doing and killing themselves, not even because they want to, but they're killing themselves because they want to fit into an algorithm. That is the world that we are living in.
Well, can you just step back? I want to, because again, I want to get a better sense of your analysis of how this harm happens, right? Because it's not just about you're online when you could be with friends, or you're online when you could be doing something more productive, right? It's something, my understanding is that it's something beyond that.
Yeah, well, first of all, most of the kids that we work with, they go to social media because they're trying to numb out. They use social media as a coping mechanism. What we miss in this conversation is the intersection between emotional health and digital health. We talk about physical health, sexual health, but digital well-being and giving kids the agencies and the skills to engage with social media in a positive way is what we see and believe is possible. And that's where a lot of our education work happens. So like anything, if you get in a car, you don't know how to drive it, you're probably gonna crash. If you get in a car and you're drunk or you're depressed, you're probably gonna be more likely to crash as well. Then you take a kid that's underage, that's 8 years old, and you put them in the car, and what do you think happens? That's what we are doing with these devices by putting them in kids' hands and even trying to numb kids' emotions as adults, using them as babysitters, and we have to take accountability there too.
That federal law that you spoke of earlier is nothing more than a products liability case. That's it. And so it's really critically important that I hope that the United States Senate passes the bill, and I hope it goes to the House where it passes and gets to the president's desk. And at a time when our government is broken, our federal government is broken, to see a bipartisan approach to an issue that most Americans care about provides me with some hope. And that's why all of us need to urge our United States senators as well as our Congress members, to pass this bill and to prevent this from happening. The fact that these algorithms are curated towards individual children is an issue that all of us should be concerned about.
And not only, for all the harms that have been documented, the fact that we all say like Instagram is not real life, Twitter is not real life, this glorified view of what you see on social media does not reflect reality. That's really making an impression on these young kids, particularly young girls in this case. And it's not just the immediate mental health effects. Larissa talked about how kids are choking themselves. We lost a 14-year-old boy in New York City 2 weeks ago to subway surfing because he saw it on Instagram. There are pages where you can just find other people subway surfing, and he thought he would look cool doing it. Take it one step further, it's very easy, or it's very common for young boys in particular to find people like Andrew Tate on social media and to hear his toxic, noxious, misogynistic, xenophobic, homophobic rhetoric, and then they hear it, they indoctrinate it, and it's not how they interact digitally. That's now affecting and shaping how they interact with people in real life. So think about young boys and young girls having their first relationships, and now young boys are being poisoned with this type of content. It's all available online, and it's perpetuating this endless cycle that's causing a mental health crisis.
Now, there's a couple objections that there's both objections to the legislation, but there's also objections that people make to this whole way of thinking about the issue. And I think one of the most common is that precisely it's bipartisan because it's a moral panic, right? You'll hear this a lot, that every new technology has elicited a lot of fears about its effect on young people, right? Radio, people were worried about what it implied for conversation, television, comic books, novels. And so what makes this different?
So again, the bill that the senator is introducing, and Assemblywoman Neely Rosick, who unfortunately could not join us this evening, does not focus on content. And that's why it will pass a constitutional challenge. It is carefully crafted to focus on these addictive algorithms and provide individuals with a default measure. And so that's why I am confident that when this bill is passed, and I'm confident that given Senator Granardis, this bill will pass. It is supported by the governor and a countless number of the colleagues in Albany, that when it does pass, and my office will defend it, we will be successful in our effort.
I also just want to say that it is so critical that we pass this because we are moving from an era that is about content that humans create, and we are moving into an era where algorithms create content with AI. And so many of the bills that are on the table right now barely even come into consideration of what young people are facing. I know kids who have had deepfakes made about them in the last few weeks and have had death threats outside of their house. I know kids who have had deepfakes made about them and who have actually had their college applications intercepted at admissions places. We just saw what happened with Taylor Swift. That was only a moment of time, but now it's not even the heroes of the world, it's our children that this is going to happen to. And so while all of these things, if we don't pass what you are creating, we won't have a way to deal with what problems are on the horizon. And this is moving faster than humanity can even capture.
So another, I think, common objection is that, and this is the objection that comes from the privacy space often, is that if you're going to do age verification, you're kind of requiring the uploading of documents that puts kids' privacy at risk. And so how does your bill handle that? How does it handle age verification? And kind of are people going to need to upload their documents to these companies?
Sure. So first of all, as a matter of federal law right now, internet companies and social media companies have to have certain privacy protections in place for verified users under the age of 13. That's the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA. You hear it a lot. It was the last time Congress passed any law to protect kids online. You know when that was? 1998. Who remembers getting AOL discs in the mail back in 1998? Who remembers dial-up in 1998? That was the last time Congress, our federal legislature, took any action to protect young kids online. The world has changed 1,000 times over. The internet has changed 1,000 times over. So these companies already have to comply with age verification for 13 and under. And so if they're not able to do it with what we're proposing, you have to ask yourself, are they not currently in compliance with federal law? What we believe is that they actually can verify. You talk to these companies, and sometimes if you talk to them the right way, they reveal a lot. They know how old you are, even if you put in the wrong information. They know what you ate for breakfast before you finished last night's dinner. They know based on what you search for. They know based on what's in your profile. They know based on what you like, what you pause on, what you comment on. Their algorithms are so perfected, and their AI is so perfected, they know how old these users are. I had one social media company in my office over the summer casually say, oh yeah, we know within like a 99% certainty how old someone is. And if we feel that they are under 13, we boot them off the app automatically. So I don't buy the argument that these companies can't verify ages. And under the bill that we're proposing, we empower the Attorney General's office to issue regulations to kind of perfect that last 1% gap to make sure that we actually get everyone we're trying to protect here. But these companies can do this.
So it's important that the audience understand it's two bills. There's one that focuses on the addictive algorithms and the other that focuses on the commercialization of children's data. And so both bills must pass, and both of them empower the Office of the Attorney General to sue for damages up to $5,000 per violation. More work.
Which, by the way, $5,000 is nothing in the scheme of things. Last year, big tech made $11 billion off of minors and advertising data. This is pennies. This is a benchmark and a baseline. And what I really think is we need to start looking at this as an investment in humanity in the future. This is really the climate change of the minds of young people.
But what also it provides is a private right of action. And I thank the Senator for including a private right of action so parents can also take action into their own hands.
And
it empowers parents.
Yeah. And the $5,000, you're right, it's still not enough. $5,000 per violation, but you look at an app like TikTok that has about 10 million users in the state of New York, that's 5,000 times 10 million, right? And then that adds up. And so we love it to be more, but sometimes it's hard to peg down, but we think this is a sufficient stick to really get compliance.
And it's a good starting point. It's not going to scare people away. It's not saying, hey, we're going to charge $100,000 per violation, because there's also a bit of wiggle room there. And so I think there is something about, we need to have reality cross the line. We can't let perfection get in the way of progress. And right now, we are waiting for a bill like this that actually can be passed and we can have data around to create a standard and a system for other big cities and states in America. And right now, we don't have that. And I really believe with your team and Mayor Adams making the public statement last week and us being able to create education and coalition amongst schools, we have a real opportunity in New York, as people look to us all over the world, to do this right.
So we were talking backstage about some of the lobbying opposition that you're seeing, which I want to get into in a second. But one piece of that opposition comes from some gay and lesbian groups. Some of them are kind of astroturfed, I think we can agree, but nevertheless, the argument is essentially that, as toxic as social media can be, it's also a lifeline for kids who are really isolated. And, as terrified as I am about the impact of social media on my kids once they are old enough to access it, I also think about when I was a kid growing up in Buffalo, New York, feeling like extremely alienated and lonely, what it would have meant for me to be able to connect with other people who didn't like football.
So, this legislation is not going to prevent marginalized and vulnerable populations from connecting with others. Again, it just focuses on these addictive algorithms. That's what's really important to understand. And two, these groups that have been formed, these affinity groups as I refer to them, the question is whether or not they were formed for the purposes of criticizing or attacking this bill. The vast majority of organizations support this bill because they recognize the harms of these addictive feeds. And that's why a number of them have supported this effort.
And often some of the challenges that individuals from marginalized communities face as they go through their journeys comes from the harms and the bullying and the kind of the exploitation that occurs on social media. And so I find it a little ironic that big tech will hide behind some of these organizations, some AstroTurf, some legitimate, to say, oh, no, if you take this away, you're going to harm these kids, ignoring the fact that their products are actually causing some of the significant harm for these very same kids that we are trying to protect. And like the Attorney General said, there's nothing to stop anyone from following under our bill. We want you to be able to follow your family, follow your friends, follow the Trevor page, follow the Taylor Swift fan page, like whatever you want to follow, get whatever content you want. We're not trying to end or ban any type of content. We want you to be able to do that and search for whatever terms you want to search for, as long as they comply with decency standards and app standards, all those things. We just don't want the app to assume that they know what you should be seeing next, and then using that to sell you ads and take your data and make billions off of you.
Yeah, I also think we need to have more emotional algorithmic agency. As a young person, one of my biggest struggles when I was dealing with mental health issues is that the platform assumed that I wanted to see eating disorder content. The platform assumed that I wanted to see depression content. And so although I was going to therapy and starting to talk to people again and working out, I was spending 10 hours a day on my phone, and the platform was showing me what they thought I wanted. And that kept me in that hole. I didn't have the ability to reset my interests or to say, I don't want to see this anymore. I want to see pugs. And that's a real problem. And that's a part of that emotional rabbit hole that you were asking about earlier, is like, what is it that creates this? It's that it's really hard to get out of those places when the platform thinks they know who you are.
So how would this legislation function with TikTok in particular? Because TikTok is kind of all algorithm.
Look, this is going to have an impact on apps like TikTok, right? Because they thrive on creating the algorithm and showing you all of this stuff. The bill is drafted in a way so that videos or reels or photos or what have you of general public interest, things that go viral, things that are very topical, are not kind of subject to the restrictions of the algorithm. So if there's a general video that's going viral around the world, you'd still be able to see that. What we are regulating here is saying that they cannot curate that content for you based on your profile, your characteristics, your prior search history, your geographic location, previous videos you've clicked on, previous things you've searched for, which is what the algorithm does now. So general interest can still be shown, and you can still access that. It just can't show you that based on some formula it's calculated about you to assume this is what you want to see.
Yeah. And Michelle, it's also important to understand, as we talk about the harms, the litigation that my office is involved in, as well as this legislation, focuses on the use of social media after midnight, which is harmful to children because of the lack of sleep. And there have been a number of peer scientific studies which document the harm to children, particularly given the lack of sleep. And that's what we are trying to correct.
Right, and so how does the legislation address that? So
the litigation that I am involved in
Okay.
focuses primarily on allowing parents, again, this default measure, so that the children cannot use these apps between the hours of 12 to 6 a.m. And so that's part of our litigation as well.
But isn't that also part of the legislation?
It's part of the legislation as a default option for users under the age of 18. We want to have the default be that notifications are turned off from 12 midnight to 6 a.m. Again, being the default, you have the option with consent to turn that on. So if you as a parent are making an educated and empowered decision to say, you know what, I trust my kids to have full access, I trust my kids to get a tag alert or a comment alert at 2 in the morning, that's fine. You can turn that on. We also give parents the ability just to have the apps turn off over those same hours. We want to empower both parents and kids to be able to put them in charge of their social media experience, not the other way around.
And also on the data bill, it's just consistent with COPPA. COPPA focuses on children under the age of 13. This data bill, this data privacy bill, expands it so that they cannot monetize data for individuals under the age of 18.
How does the bill, I mean, anything is going to have kind of workarounds, but I have like kind of screen limits on my kids' devices. which can then be overrode on my computer, which my kids have figured out the password to. And, and my kids aren't even teenagers yet. What is going to stop kids from just kind of opting into the algorithms? I mean, does this kind of depend on parents keeping up with their kids' technological savvy?
Well, I'll tell you that these kids are so fast. I feel geriatric working with our teens every single week. They respond to emails in T-minus 5 seconds. You ask them to give their feedback on a hearing. You have a full document with 3 videos with feedback within 30 minutes. I'm not kidding you. You can ask my team in the front row. They'd agree. With that, these teens can work around more than we want to admit. And as they probably break into things before they should in other devices or vices in their lives, there's always the probability that that's going to happen here. But what we're trying to do, what you're trying to do, is just create some sort of safeguard. Like, hey, we know kids might jump in a car and drive it before they have their license, but we at least have some sort of standard in place. Right now, we don't have any standard. Like, the bar is so low, it's honestly disgusting. And this is just creating one system that's in place. And yes, parents might have to be involved, and not every kid has a parent, but right now, we need something. Like, what do we have right now to go back on?
It establishes guardrails.
Yeah.
And that's what's really critically important. And the guardrails obviously will educate parents and hopefully provide for more means to address the whole issue of age verification.
So does the data privacy part stop these companies from advertising to kids, or from targeting advertisements to kids?
So it targets them, and then it also prevents, again.
So we don't ban the actual advertisements. We just ban the commercialization of the data, because that's really where the money is in the specialization and the customization of the ad, so that Tish and I are sitting side by side looking at the same thing. We're going to get different ads at the same time from the same app because we have different algorithmic profile, right? And so what we're saying is that we're not going to ban the advertisements, but we're going to make it harder for you to customize those ads based on each individual user, based, again, on their data. There's no reason why a social media company should be targeting an ad to a child based on who they are, where they live, they like the color purple and pepperoni pizza and Bruce Springsteen. That should not be a dollar sign to a company. They could still send general interest ads. They can send general advertisements.
But what does that mean? Does that mean like they can advertise like Toyota to my 12-year-old or something?
That's a business choice for them. I mean,
Yeah.
Toyota
Yeah.
would probably not want to have an ad to them, right?
But how? I guess I'm saying, like, wouldn't it stop them from determining who they're advertising to?
They could still use, so under the Child Data Privacy Act, some personal data can be used for the general operation of the internet service. So if Toyota said we only want to advertise to adults, they would be able to craft that out. What they could not say is we want to sell ads, we want to sell toy ads to kids living in this zip code who have previously liked these types of things, or whose parents, based on their Amazon search history, have bought Cocomelon videos or whatever. That's the type of specification that we're talking about that we want to prohibit. General ads are fine, and this is how their business model operates. I had, again, another media company in my office saying, well, if you did this, we might be forced to, instead of showing them 2 ads an hour, now we have to show them like 30 ads an hour, and that would dilute the user experience. And that's true because that's how their business model operates. But my response to them was, or you could just not make that extra dollar on the ad. Like, we're not talking about banning all targeted advertisers. Like, we can have a conversation about adults getting targeted ads and you saying something in front of your Alexa and you're seeing it on your phone 30 seconds later. That's a separate conversation. We're just talking about kids here, and they made $11 billion off of kids 2 years ago on these ad sales. That's really what we're trying to strike a heart at.
Well, also just being on the other side, you might maybe not even realize what you're doing here, but in a way, you're creating less of an incentive for these companies to advertise for kids, because the cost of acquiring a child will go up if they have less data to be precise with that advertisement. So in a way, we're ultimately playing against the business model. So they're less incentivized to invest their advertising dollars there. I only know that because in my past life, I lived on marketing teams and looked at CAC and how these ads are actually created. So there's a huge business case that you're actually creating with this for tech to not spend as much money on kid ads.
Okay, so speaking of the business case, tell me about kind of what how you see the industry mobilizing against you, and kind of what what you expect the lobbying pushback to look like.
So they've hired just about 12 lobbyists so far, and they're going to target members of the legislature. They're going to use the First Amendment. They're going to use all of these affinity groups. They're going to talk about the business model overall. But right now, I know that the vast majority of members of the legislature, the Assembly, and the Senate support Senator Gennardis's bill, and I'm confident because it is in a budget bill as opposed to a standalone bill that it will pass, and that's what's really critically important. It is not a standalone bill. It is in our budget bill, and the budget bill must be passed by the end of March. There's already been a preliminary hearing already in Albany, and I'm confident that given the fact that it is part of the budget bill, that it will pass.
Yeah, we're hopeful that's how our path to getting the bill passed. I'll tell you, how these companies are operating. They've hired 12 lobby firms so far just in New York, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in just a few months since we've introduced these bills together to oppose our bills. And what they're doing is, it's really fascinating. They have these trade associations that are out there saying, Gennardis and James want to shut down the internet. Gennardis and James want to charge children for email addresses. Don't support Hochul's censorship bill. And this is like what their trade associations are saying.
Billboards in Albany.
But meanwhile, the individual companies are coming to us and saying, hey, we agree. We want to protect kids. The companies that make up these trade associations, hey, we're with you. We think that we want to protect kids too, and that's why we're doing A, B, C. You saw it today in Congress. We're doing our best. So they're playing this good cop, bad cop routine, and we see right through it because if they actually believe that, A, they would not be individually spending all this money to lobby against us, B, they'd not be part of trade associations that are saying ridiculous, spurious things. And then lastly, they are forming these affinity groups and these affinity associations like the Coalition for an Inclusive Internet. And they're recruiting all of these organizations and filling them with misinformation to kind of come out and oppose the bill. And then once we start talking to these groups, as we have, they're like, well, that's not what they told us. They told us you wanted to do X, Y, Z. That doesn't sound like what you're doing at all. And so it is a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole because they're trying every strategy. By the way, this playbook is the same playbook they've run in every other state. And so when you look at what they've done in California and other states like that, we kind of know what the next move is. And it's just kind of funny that they have not changed their tactics in any way.
So all of these parental controls that they're now proposing, they're really burdensome, and they're difficult for parents to access. And so that's why it's important that we have a default system. Two, I've seen this play out before when we, again, went after Big Pharma, when we went after the e-cigarettes. All of these major lobbyists were hired by these companies, again, to kill these bills, defeat these bills, water down these bills, target individuals, target the Attorney General. But it's important that individuals understand the harm, understand what's happening to children, recognize that we have to stand up for parental rights, and we have to stand up, again, to protect children. It's really critically important, and not be part of an effort where you stand with corporate interest that have hijacked our government.
The other thing is that the data shows us that the parental controls aren't working. We were just at a cyberbullying conference with our head of research. A platform, I won't name them, got up and said only 9% of the parents on our platform use this feature. Why? Who is telling the parents that these exist? Do you think every parent is reading Wall Street Journal, has Google alerts for these every day? They're not. So the companies are telling us in these science conferences that isn't working. And on the flip side, look at the climate movement. The idea of a carbon footprint was created by a PR firm to take the onus off of big oil and put it on the consumer. Screen time, similarly, putting parental controls, all of this is taking the onus off of big tech and putting it on the parent, which the majority of the kids that we work with, their parents aren't around. They've got multiple jobs. Some of our kids are even more digitally literate than them. So we need to be thinking about policies that support all New Yorkers and all Americans, not just the 1% that might be writing the bills or even designing or working at these platforms.
Why don't I turn it over to you for questions?
Yes.
You said that you're expecting and anticipating big tech. Wait for that.
You said that you're anticipating the tech companies to challenge you on your efforts to move forward. What are you expecting specifically, and how are you anticipating retaliating?
So it's not a question of retaliating. It's a question of defending the state.
That's what I mean, defending. I shouldn't say retaliating.
okay.
I
Feels
mean,
like a fight.
I don't mean it in that way, to be clear.
As a state council, I have to represent and defend the legislature. So we're prepared to defend this bill. So what do I mean by defending this bill? In other states, California, Arkansas, all of these bills have been challenged by big tech, and most of them have been enjoined. They've been enjoined based on violations of the First Amendment. They've been enjoined by Section 230. So it's important, again, that individuals understand that I am confident that the bill that has been crafted by Senator Granardis, which is carefully crafted, which does not focus on content, does not limit content, will surpass constitutional muster, and that this bill will go into effect. But they are prepared. They have an army of attorneys that is prepared to challenge any effort any attack at their business model, and their business model primarily is money. Do you have a team of attorneys ready to? I have 1,600 attorneys all throughout the state of New York, and we've been pretty successful at most of our efforts.
I'll just say, the legislature passes 900, 1,000 laws a year, some more artfully drafted than others. It's impossible to sit down with the Attorney General's office on every bill or the Governor's office on every bill before we pass it, because it's just the volume's so great. But on a bill like this, we actually have worked hand in hand with the Attorney General's office and the Governor's office to really ensure that we've done our due diligence to make sure that what we do pass here, because we know we're going to be expecting litigation, that we've done it in a way that allows us to put the best possible defense forward and offense forward, really, so that when these bills get challenged, we know that we're sending the Attorney General in to the courtroom with the full backing that we did the right thing here. It was not inartfully drafted. We weren't sloppy with the language. We weren't trying to be too cute by just saying we're going to ban social media like Florida's trying to do now, or other states. So that's a rarity in terms of how we've approached this process, really thoughtfully, to make sure that we get it right.
Hi, Jonathan Askin, a professor at Brooklyn Law School. I was wondering if you're comfortable identifying the trade associations that are opposing the bill and lobbyists, and identify any trade associations and consumer groups who either are counterbalancing them or are strangely silent and should be supporting the bill.
So Net Choice, or TechNet, I guess they go by both names really, is the Big Tech Trade Association, National Trade Association. They actually wrote an op-ed about a week after we did our announcement in October in the Daily News saying stop the Hochul censorship bill. They're based, I think, in DC. They're the ones that are leading all the litigation in other states. So that's been really where a lot of these groups have been organizing. Some of the New York City-based tech trade associations have expressed concerns and have done some of the lobbying against us because their constituent members are all tech companies, big tech and otherwise. We've recruited, I think we're up to 70 or 80 groups across the state. We have the New York State Association of Pediatricians. We have the New York State Association of PTAs, the Teachers Union, the Principals Union, Common Sense Media, which is a national grassroots organization of parents who are concerned about content online, and so many others, Larissa's organization, like so many more. I can go on and on and on to kind of counterbalance that. And that's really, you think about it, it's community versus kind of tech in a lot of ways. We've also heard really positive feedback from some former tech executives and former tech employees and people in the tech world who are very supportive because they see what's happening. They've seen what happened with their own kids. They see what's happened with their own families. And they've reached out, some privately, some publicly, to say, hey, we're with you on this. We think you're doing the right thing. And keep going. And so that's all been very positive.
For me, the most consequential group that has come out in support of this legislation, both pieces of legislation, have been children, the voices of children. To hear their stories, the impact that they've experienced online, the bullying, girls in particular, the harms to girls, the self-mutilation, the attempts at suicide, the depression. Listen to the teenagers, the children.
Can I interject a quick question? Can you be more specific about how your legislation how kind of bullying, how the algorithm and bullying fit together? I mean, I've heard from principals that, that a lot of fights in schools are things that start online. But is that the kind of thing that is algorithmically amplified?
Not necessarily. Look, our approach does not solve for every evil that exists on social media, and it does not solve for every problem that manifests itself in an online experience. To do so would be really, really hard. What we've tried to do here is identify, based on research, what we think the greatest identifiable cause of the harm that we see a linkage to is, and that's been the algorithm, and really hone our focus on that in order to satisfy constitutional muster. Because in order to pass a First Amendment challenge, our approach has to be narrowly tailored to focus on specific harms that have a compelling interest in protecting an identifiable community here, which is children. And so we kept it tight and focused to address the greatest harm, not all harms. Though, of course, just by changing the feeds themselves to be more chronological, like the way Facebook used to be before it went off the rails and you started seeing like COVID cures with graham crackers and battery acid, we think that in and of itself will change the tenor and the experience that people have and kind of take the temperature down in a lot of these social interactions and a lot of these communities and amongst digital natives in a way that should address some of these secondary and tertiary problems that are manifesting.
I mean, we get to work with kids every day, and our MO at Half the Story is to empower young boys in every room where a decision is being made about them. And they're there, they go, they tell their stories, but a lot of the time, the people that are passing these bills have never really spent more than 3 hours on social media in a day. So you have these 15-year-old girls talking to these people that honestly didn't grow up, and it makes it really hard for them to understand. But on the flip side, the next generation wants to do so much, and although they're exhausted and they're tired of waiting for big tech, we're seeing the pendulum swing, and they're taking this in their own hands. And they're coming to us and saying, hey, how can you help us get funding for this in our own school? How can you help make screen-free recess here? How can you help do this? Because we can't wait another year for adults to decide to prioritize our minds over their dollars. So we're gonna take the reins. And that, in the spirit of hope, is the reason I'm still sitting up here. And the reason why I'm still doing this, because after 9 years looking at this today, makes you wanna cry to see how far behind we are, that it's been since 1998 that we've had a national legislation. So we need to give our keys and have actually baseline that allows people to opt into being on the other side and have safety be that, because we don't live in a world where that is. And I'm curious from your perspective, this is not just about online. This is also about public health outcomes. And this is so far beyond the digital world. And I'm just curious from your lens too, like how you see this unfolding, because it goes into so many other phases.
Like on so many issues right now, it's state action. And I wish, Michelle, going back to what we can do further with respect to social media. I wish we can focus on misinformation and disinformation, but I'm constrained by the First Amendment. I wish we can focus on a wide range of issues, but Section 230 gets in the way. So this is a start, and this provides me with hope. And the fact is that my colleagues all across this nation are taking action in the face of the federal government, which is broken at this point in time. We've got to step up and take action, and I really want to commend Senator Gennardis and Assemblywoman Rosick for stepping up and leading the way.
Hi. Hi, my name is Melissa Prober. I used to be the general counsel at the JED Foundation, which is Mental Health and Suicide Prevention for Teens and young adults, and then now the executive director at the Jack Reed Foundation, and he was the boy who was basically bullied to death at his school. And I want to thank Senator Janardis for co-sponsoring the bill that Jack's parents are really spearheading to bring the Dignity for All Students Act to apply to all schools. So thank you. I also want to thank all of you. This is such an important conversation. I'm so happy that you're focusing and prioritizing this when you could be doing so many other important things. And it does seem like it's so narrowly tailored, and I wish we could do so much more. I have one other comment and then a question. One, with respect to the question about how does the algorithms address bullying and other issues, one of the things we know is the sexualization of girls and their own self-sexualization through the algorithms will lead to their mental health, which you guys have addressed. But also that is a link to those girls are going to be bullied and get bullied more, and there's data on that. So it's all tied together that this bill could really help in so many different ways, and I do think it can address the bullying issue and the all the mental health issues with the girls. My question is, Michelle, at the very beginning, you said, mentioned with the hearings today, and I watched some of the clips, and it's like absolutely bananas. And hatred for Mark Zuckerberg brings together people like nothing else. And you watch that, you watch the clips of Hawley and Cruz and Lindsey Graham and Blackburn, and you're like, wow, this is like, maybe this will go somewhere. But you comment in the beginning, it might not. I mean, is that all performative? Do you think that it will be a sea change, or is this just going to be status quo?
I've never spoken to anyone who is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've not spoken to anyone who's super optimistic about COSA passing.
Not in this session, no. And not given the political realities. Perhaps after next year, when the House is taken over by Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, perhaps we'll see some movement. I know that he is supportive, since he's my neighbor.
I mean, and this is this is an irony, I think, that we've seen a lot, that you see, I mean, although, to be fair, there certainly are Republican states that have tried to take action against big tech, but there's also this irony of you see a lot of kind of high-profile Republicans fulminating against these various companies, but when it comes time to pass laws, the just sort of, my understanding is that the kind of basic pro-corporate assumptions of the party tend to predominate.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the other part of this too is that a lot of these bills die silently in appropriations. Mm-hmm. And we don't talk about that. And that's because that's a fiduciary aspect to these bills, and there's so many literally politics behind the scenes. And as a young person that's been on these calls, even with some of our teens, like, I'm pretty flabbergasted that some people are killing bills or pushing things away just so that they could have their own interests or their own budgets prioritized. And that's the reality of the system that we live in. And I will say, though, you asked about the sea change. I mean, I've been fighting for this work for the last 9 years, this specific issue. The fact that we're even sitting on the stage, the fact that you aligned with all these other attorney generals to come up against these big tech, like, that is change.
Mississippi.
Yeah. Like, I mean,
Texas.
This is change. And maybe it's going to take our federal government another 5 years, but we can't wait. And that's why it takes the states. And that's why we have to pass this. And that's why we also have to work on education, which is our work, because knowledge is power. And when you have knowledge and power and you look at digital wellness as an inside job paired with safeties and parameters, your outcomes are probably going to be a lot better.
But the sea change, I believe in power coming from the ground up and not the top down. We've got to give credit to all of the parents who were at that hearing today, who held up pictures of their loved ones. Power will come from parents and individuals who are going to turn their pain into progress. So don't ever, ever, ever underestimate the power of individuals. And so I think that is what is going to cause the sea change in this nation. Power of parents and power of individuals who are dealing with their harm.
That's a good plug to say, while we wait for the next question, make sure that you reach out to your assembly member and your state senator to express support for the bills that we're talking about here, if you like what we're talking about here tonight. If I'm your state senator, feel free to grab me after tonight, but if I'm not, please make sure you reach out to your local legislator so they hear from you, because they will respond if they hear from you. And if you don't, they're not going to know that you care. Because as a legislator, every day we drink out of a fire hose of issues. Everyone has a crisis. Everyone has a priority. It's hard to separate, kind of what's important in the moment unless we hear from our constituents. So please take that 5 minutes to look up who your assembly member is, to look up who your state senator is. Send that email, send the tweet, make the phone call. It matters.
Hi, so Amanda Hannah McClear. I'm a former educator and filmmaker. I'm currently directing a documentary about the kids who call themselves the Luddites. They were published in the Times last year. They've gotten rid of their smartphones and/or social media. And while I was an educator, I've been off social media for 2 years. I was just using myself as like a social experiment, see what happened to me. And my kids' screen times, it was like 7 to 9 hours a day. That was the average. The record was 20 hours, to which I said, "Girl, did you sleep?" This was over Christmas break, and she said, "I took naps." So I fully know the impact on kids, and I'm trying to get the kids to speak for themselves in the doc as much as possible. It's a real collaboration between myself and one of my students who graduated last year. But my question, I'm always curious about what protections we could put in place for everyone else. I know kids are our most vulnerable, but I sometimes feel like they're used as a scapegoat because they are the most vulnerable, like, oh, they fall prey, and then we don't look at ourselves. I joke with my kids to try and warm them up. I always say things like, everyone says you guys are terrible with your phones, but have you ever seen a grandparent at a restaurant? And sometimes they're on TikTok at full volume. So I'm really curious about, Senator Gennardis, you were talking about, the Alexa listening to you. Curious about what kind of protections we can put in place for adults and others besides children. Yeah. Any kind of consideration we're thinking about legislatively.
I would love to do more. I think our approach and our thinking right now is twofold. Number one, it's hard to even do any of this, so let's take bite-sized chunks. And this approach, as hard as this is going to be, is the easiest. And number two, the linkage between what we've identified as the harm or the causing harm here, which is the algorithm, and kids' mental health is very strong with the data. That allows us to make the case in court, when Tish has to go to court to defend what we do, that allows us to survive legal scrutiny. Once you start going broader than that, and once you start touching other things that it's a little bit more amorphous, a little bit more fungible, it gets harder to articulate very clearly the exact legal standard, to meet the legal standards that we have to rise to in order to let these laws survive. So as much as I would love to do more, it's hard with the legal landscape, like Tish said, because we have the First Amendment, because we have Section 230, and because we think that let's do this first, let's succeed here, and then we can go take next steps.
But can I also just say that I was speaking to the senator, we're going to go around the state and talk about this bill, and I asked the senator, and the senator agrees, the next audience that we want to talk to or hear from are children. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
We're going to continue the conversation, but I know the Attorney General has another commitment. So I want to say thank you for being part of this. And I'll continue with this question here.
Thank you all for being here. I'm a PhD student at Columbia in the psychology department. I specifically study intersection of psychology and digital spaces. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the origins of the bill, and you started to touch on this in the last answer, but what research went into, how did you identify the algorithm as a mechanism that might be contributing to the mental health crisis? Who was involved? Were there other types of regulations you considered, and how did you land on this, other than maybe it just being least susceptible to legal challenges?
So it's a great question, and a couple of things. No, one, if you look at when algorithms started to be introduced in social media apps, right around 2011, 2012, and like Larissa said earlier, you kind of chart that growth in the use of the algorithm, and that's how all of our experiences have started to change, and you chart that against the documented increases in mental health concerns, whether it's hospital admissions, suicidal ideation, self-harm, self-reported cases of depression, self-esteem issues, et cetera. The charts are pretty clear just off the bat. And that's very, very clear data. And then there has been a bunch of research. I know Jonathan Haidt has written a bunch about this and has published a bunch about it. He's actually publishing a book, I think, next month that really kind of goes into this in great detail, showing that linkage between the algorithm specifically because of all the assumptions it makes about you based on your data and about your search history, about all this stuff, and the negative consequences from that in terms of how these health outcomes are manifesting. That, to us, has been the clearest linkage that we've seen, which is what we are kind of resting a large part of the theory of our case on. It's not the only factor. It's hard to isolate, maybe it's the like button. You actually look at, it's interesting, if you look at, as in part because of the Attorney General's litigation, there have been some discovery documents that have been released and made public. There was a huge document dump done by Meta, their lawyers, over Thanksgiving break. And one of the things in the document dump that came out, there were emails saying that, if we hide the like button and people don't see how many other people like it, it'll actually decrease the traffic, but it'll have a measurable impact on what we are seeing as a mental health issue, but it's going to cost X dollars in ad revenue. And then you see the Meta executives saying well, then no, we're not going to do that, right? So we could argue that it is the algorithm, it's the it's the comment, all these things are connected. We think the greatest culprit there is the use of the algorithm, amongst other things. And so that's kind of where we're taking our principal focus.
Hi there, I guess I'm standing. Michael Kaufman, dad of 3, all teenagers.
So you're in it.
I'm in the thick of it. So first of all, thank you. This is the first time I've actually heard somebody say anything about finding a way to increase the cost of a child to social and using that as a tactic. So that's amazing. And it's a great way to start keeping children out of the grasp of social media. And I'm hoping that we, as New York, so again, yay us, will lead the other states and maybe eventually the federal government, maybe, to take a kind of similar tact. Once we do that, again, hopefully, even if the algorithm was taken out of the picture entirely, kids don't necessarily make the right choices. They just don't. I can give you examples. My question is, what can be done, not from a parent side, but from a legal, state, federal level, government level, to allow parents to parent? Is there an opening to demand that children's content be open to review by their parents and caregivers? Maybe using that same, the same children that can't be, prey to the algorithm, their data needs to be open.
So my father's in the audience. I'm sure he'll agree with you that young people don't always make the right decisions. So I'll say a couple things, and I'm sure Alyssa might have some things to add here. When you start, the way we view this is we want to put guardrails in place to, like I said earlier, empower young users and parents to be able to have the safest experience, right? Think about it in the cigarette context, right? We have laws in place around selling cigarettes to kids. We have laws in place around advertising cigarettes to kids, how cigarettes can be used in film and otherwise, about marketing, right? That doesn't mean that kids are not going to get a hand on a cigarette and take a puff, right? So we know that every system is not foolproof, but this allows us to have a system of safeguards in place to do the greatest good possible, while creating the space to allow parents to feel more empowered and better educated along with their kids about how to make smarter choices, right? It's never going to be perfect, but it at least creates the space so that right now what we're hearing from parents and from kids, they're just overwhelmed. They don't know how to even start thinking about how to respond. this at least gives them a fighting chance. Some of the things you mentioned, I'm sure a lot of parents would like that. I think that raises a lot of concerns, some privacy concerns and some civil liberty concerns, especially for some of the marginalized populations that we talked about earlier. Imagine being an LGBTQ teenager whose parents are not understanding or loving or whatever, compassionate, and you're trying to find resources, you're trying to find community, you're trying to make friends. You don't want your parents approving some of your search terms. If you're looking at the Trevor page or whatever, you don't want your parents, and nor do I think that we want to legislate those protections away. So, those are things that maybe on an individual basis, some parents might feel more comfortable with, but I think it raises a lot of other questions that are harder to answer and that are harder to legislate. Not that it's not the right thing, that it's not the wrong thing, but it's a lot thornier, and it's not as black and white, I think, in those cases. As much as we want to have as much control as possible over the situation, because right now we're all feeling powerless and hopeless, because, as Larissa said earlier, we've been conditioned to think that it's all on us, right? Oh, just parents shouldn't let their kids have a cigarette. Oh, it's fine. Even though we know 50 years of research shows that they knew that this was addictive and they knew that they were targeting kids, and that's what their business model was until we were finally able to fight back. It's the same exact concept here.
Yeah, I just will say what our teens say and what our youth say, and it's really exactly what you said. Kids that are from marginalized communities, kids that are experiencing sexual abuse at home, social media is a safe haven and oftentimes a path to saving their lives, to getting support and reaching out to those that they need. What I will say is that there's kind of an analogy that you can use here. So you have teenagers in New York City. They probably have phones. When they go somewhere, you have an option. You have the option to say, hey, call me when you get to Martha's house, and I'm going to trust you that you're at Martha's house and that you're going to come home by midnight. Your other option is to say, I'm going to put a tracker on your phone so that I can make sure that you're at Martha's house. The same thing goes with the digital world, and there are tools that exist out there that would allow you to look at content. Bark Technology is one of them that creates alerts for parents, but I firmly believe the best outcomes come to trust, and this is why we need to invest in education for not only kids, but also parents and ecosystems, and we need a new shared vocabulary around tech besides good, bad, or addicted, because it's so much more nuanced than that. And so I support bills and advocate, but all of our work is based on education and connecting the dots between agency, emotional health, and the digital world.
Hi, my name is David Hughes, Senator. I'm one of your constituents, and I'm going to go back to one of the things that you mentioned about some of the trade associations that you have lined up in support of your organization. On the gun control side, there is a national organization, Moms Demand Action, that has state-level chapters that pressure state legislatures to support the legislation, that they're behind. Is there a similar organization nationally with state chapters that are supporting internet safety guardrails?
So some of the groups I mentioned are state affiliates of more national umbrella organizations. Common Sense Media, is a national organization. They have a New York chapter with, tens of thousands of members as part of their distribution list, as part of their activist list. They are in support of our legislation. Just last week, I was at a house party for a new group called MAMA, Moms Against Media Addiction, that is hoping to become a national organization. But it actually was started here in Brooklyn and has a number of chapters in New York, and in New Jersey as they're trying to grow. So we are building some of that grassroots support. This movement has been, it's a little bit younger than the gun rights movement, notwithstanding Larissa's work in this field for more than a decade. So we're still kind of catching up in a lot of ways. And I think honestly, the pandemic kind of accelerated the trends that we were already seeing with some of these harms, because for 2-3 years, everyone's lives were totally digital. And so we've kind of been like fast forwarded to this moment right now where we're reckoning with these issues, where otherwise it may have taken a little bit longer to let some of these issues kind of bubble to the surface and allow more groups to form. But we're always looking for more support and more supporters. If you are part of a group that you think wants to get involved, come talk to me. Or if you're just a concerned parent, come talk to me too. We'll take it all.
I will say, I guess to answer your question, from being an org on the ground and seeing across multiple states, being in coalitions. We work with Common Sense. To be completely frank with you, these coalitions are very small compared to the big tech giants. And in California, there is a coalition, the Kids Online Safety, that we're a part of, that it's a couple of orgs. It's like us, Common Sense, and a few others, and it's super scrappy. Like the lobbying budgets we have are small. Even in being able to create a similar thing in New York, which we hope to do, would be great. But no, like big tech has a lot more money. They spent $69 or $70 million lobbying against these bills nationally last year. We're all getting together trying to get on calls, and half of the orgs don't even have dedicated policy people. I mean, I'm the person that's getting on all these calls and going on nights and weekends with teens. So, yeah, we're up against the 5 most powerful companies in the world that are arguably more powerful than governments, and it's hard. And that's the reality.
And also, if you're a parent of kids, right, or teenagers, your lives are already complicated. Not everyone has the time or the ability to join an organization, go to meetings, do the work. I mean, it's very hard. I give credit to the guns advocacy groups that are able to do that. But even for them, it's a significant challenge because everyone leads busy lives and complicated lives, and you have family responsibilities and personal responsibilities. And so it's sometimes hard to generate that type of support against a very organized opposition, but we still try our best. And so, which is why we take all the support we can. Mm-hmm. We don't ask you to commit to come to a meeting a month. We say just call us or email us or tweet us or write. We're trying to make the barrier to participation and support as low as possible. Because at the end of the day, as a legislator, it all matters and it's all very helpful to me.
Wait, can I ask you a quick question about I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you see any interference, or would we even know if there was in terms of when you say, tweet about us, have any of the tech companies tweaked the algorithms against, kind of advocacy for this kind of legislation?
We haven't seen anything yet. I think under Elon Musk, there's obviously been a lot of content modification concerns and, what content is or is not shown, right? I can't say that we've seen specifically, they're muting talk about the New York State bills, but not that I've seen so far.
I know that the Wall Street Journal actually did an interesting experiment on this, specifically with TikTok and the conflict that's happening in the Middle East, and actually had different bots kind of simulating 13-year-olds and was looking at that. And I think we need more of those experiments, and we need to have data behind all of this to see, are they holding back? I mean, I couldn't get my donate button up for pretty much 3 years for my nonprofit, and I don't think that's, by chance. Let's just say that. So, yeah, but I also just want to say one more thing, to kind of tie it back to this bill and maybe wrap it up or not, is as an org, what we're working on as well as the Civics Academy to actually train teens to know what their rights are, for them to feel protected in these environments, because kids are often used as political props. I'm not even a kid anymore, and I've been used as a political prop. But as a parent, anyone in this room, if you have kids and you want them to get involved, send them to Half the Story. We'll do a teen briefing and have the teens write the letters to their, to their representatives, because there's nothing more powerful. When we have teens making videos and we get them placed and we're like, okay, great, now pass this or don't, and look at us and live with that. It's so powerful. And so, we're here to do that, and we have some team members here, and we also want to take the burden off you as parents, and we want to engage your kids and make them feel like they are in control of their digital world and empowered, rather than the victims, which is the story that the media lets them live in.
Just a funny story about that. So a couple weeks ago, I was doing an interview with a journalist about these bills, and this journalist was having a high school student shadow him for the day because she wants to be a future journalist. So she, there's this program at her high school. They linked up with the journalist, and so he turned the interview over to her and said, "Do you have any questions, about this legislation? Now's your chance to play the role." And she said, "No, but I can just say I'm a teenager. Social media sucks. I'm glad you're doing this." And so to hear that, you could not have scripted it any better for us. And we had a similar experience this week on the radio too, where a kid called in and basically said the same thing. But to Larissa's point, hearing from kids is really impactful. And I think when you start hearing from kids and hearing their stories and hearing what they want and what they're being subjected to, it makes the case for itself as to how important this conversation is and for urgent action.
Okay, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. but thank you both so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for a great conversation. Thank you, Michelle, for leading it. And thanks, everybody, and have a good night.
This was amazing. Thank you so much. Really, this was so good. This is so good. To work with. Thank you so much. Really, I can't even.